My parents assured me that there was no money. But they spent the $150,000 my grandparents left me. They even issued a fake medical certificate to take it for themselves. My name is Jason, I'm 24, and just last month I discovered something that cracked open the foundation of everything I thought I knew about my family. It started with a strange conversation I overheard between my aunt and my mom while visiting for a rare family dinner. Something about Lauren doing so well with the fund, and how, at least one of the kids used it properly. I wasn't supposed to hear it, but once I did, something inside me began to itch with confusion. What fund? So after everyone had left, I asked my aunt about it directly, and she hesitated just long enough to confirm that something wasn't right. That night I went home and started digging, pulling up every old document I could find, logging into forgotten email accounts, and searching through drawers my parents never let me open growing up. What I found hit me like a punch to the chest. My grandparents, who had both passed away years ago, had set aside a sizable education fund for me when I was a child. It was supposed to be untouchable until I graduated high school. But somewhere along the way my parents quietly redirected it all to my younger sister Lauren. And the reason they were able to do that was buried in one line of paperwork I found scanned in an old folder. I had been classified as having a cognitive disability at the age of 5. A false diagnosis that somehow I had never known about, never seen, never felt the effects of, except in all the ways that suddenly made sense. The school meetings I wasn't allowed to attend, the tests they said weren't for me, the way they always talked about college like it was out of reach for me. When I confronted them, my mom looked me dead in the eyes and said, "We can't help you, tuition is expensive." Not an apology. Not even shame. Just a shrug, as if they hadn't spent 2 decades convincing me that I was less capable than I really was, all so they could funnel everything to Lauren. I started working right after high school, not because I lacked ambition, but because I genuinely believed I had no other option. While my friends filled out college applications and toured campuses, I was putting in hours at a gas station just outside town, stocking shelves, cleaning bathrooms, counting change with a forced smile, and trying not to think about what I was missing. After that, I got a job in a retail store at the local mall, where I spent years folding clothes under fluorescent lights, listening to the same music loop on the speakers, and working every holiday while pretending it didn't bother me. For 6 years I worked hard, sick or not, tired or not, just to make ends meet. I scraped together enough for rent, car repairs and cheap groceries, believing because my parents told me so, that college was simply beyond reach for someone like me. Meanwhile, my sister Lauren was living a different life entirely, studying at a private college that cost $45,000 a year, living on campus, traveling for internships, and talking about study abroad programs like they were casual weekend plans. I watched her world expand while mine stayed pinned down by a truth I hadn't yet uncovered. They had handed her the future that had been meant for me, and I never even saw it slipping through my fingers. I had good grades in school, better than most of my classmates, the kind that teachers commented on with encouraging smiles and gentle nudges toward college prep programs. I wasn't a genius, but I was consistent, focused, and genuinely loved learning, especially numbers. I dreamed of studying accounting, drawn to the structure, the logic, the way everything added up when the world so often didn't. I imagined myself in an office one day, crisp shirt, calculator in hand, building a life with stability and purpose. But every time I brought it up at home, every time I dared to mention college or tuition or financial aid, my parents would just shrug like it was all some faraway fantasy I'd never reach. "Sorry, we can't afford it," they'd say, not with sadness or regret, but with a finality that left no room for discussion. I believed them. I really did. So I stopped asking. I stopped daydreaming about lectures and campus life and started focusing on what I thought was my only path, earning just enough to survive, while watching my sister step into the future that was supposed to be mine. And for years I blamed myself. I thought I hadn't done enough, hadn't been enough. I didn't know then that the door had been slammed shut behind my back long before I ever tried to walk through it. I found the truth entirely by accident, on a quiet evening that should have been just another uncomfortable family dinner filled with small talk and careful silences. My father had asked me to grab some documents from his home office. Something routine, a tax form or insurance paper, I don't even remember now. I went without hesitation, never expecting anything more than the usual cluttered drawers and overstuffed filing cabinets. But while rifling through the mess, I saw a folder tucked in the back, labeled neatly with my name in my mother's handwriting. Curious, I pulled it out, expecting maybe some childhood medical records or school reports. Instead, I found bank statements. Dozens of them. The account had been opened the year I was born, and month after month, there were regular deposits. Some from my grandparents, others clearly marked as family contributions. It wasn't pocket change either. This was real money steadily growing over 18 years, carefully protected. Until it wasn't. Because the deposit stopped the year I came of age, and from that point on, the statements were blank. No balance, no explanation, just silence where my future should have been. I stood there frozen, the weight of it all crashing into me as I realized this was the education fund I'd never been told about, the one I was always told didn't exist. And suddenly, everything I had been made to believe about who I was and what I was worth came undone, page by page, right there in my father's office. The last entry on the bank statement hit me like a punch to the chest. A transfer, clean and clear, for just over $13,000. The date was from 4 years ago, right around the time I had finally given up on the idea of school and thrown myself fully into working full-time just to get by. The money had been moved into an account under Lauren's name, labeled clearly as an education fund. I just stared at it, trying to make sense of the betrayal, trying to convince myself there had to be another explanation. But there wasn't. It was all there in black and white. I went downstairs with the folder in my hands, heart pounding so hard I could barely keep my voice steady, and asked them directly, what was this? Why had my education fund been transferred to Lauren's name? Why had I been lied to all these years? My mom's reaction was immediate. She panicked, her face twisting with a kind of guilt she clearly wasn't used to wearing. She tried to grab the folder from me, mumbling something about misunderstandings and not the full story, but my dad cut in before she could finish. He started yelling, his voice sharp and defensive, accusing me of digging through things that weren't mine and looking in the wrong place. He didn't deny it. He didn't even try. He just got angry that I had found the truth, as if the real betrayal wasn't what they had done, but that I had dared to uncover it. And in that moment, standing in the living room of the house where I had spent my whole life being made to feel like I wasn't enough, I realized I had never been the problem. They were. Their excuse, when the shouting finally died down and I demanded an explanation, was almost laughable in its cruelty. They told me I didn't go to college myself. As if I had simply chosen not to pursue an education. As if it had been some careless decision I made without ever asking for help. I stood there in disbelief, clutching the folder with my name on it, and reminded them, voice shaking, that for years they had told me over and over again that there was no money. I reminded them of the nights I stayed up researching scholarships, of the applications I filled out alone in my room, of the acceptance letters I had shown them with hope in my chest only to be met with those same empty words, "Sorry, we can't afford it." They knew. They knew I had gotten in. They knew I wanted it more than anything. And they lied. Not just once, not in passing, but over and over again, until I started believing I wasn't good enough, that I wasn't meant for something more. They let me give up on myself while they quietly handed everything to Lauren, then turned around and blamed me for not finding a way. And in that moment, the betrayal became something deeper. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the years of silence, of watching me struggle, of letting me drown while pretending they were helpless. It was about letting me build a life on broken pieces while they held the whole picture and never once offered me even a glimpse of it. Lauren looked genuinely shocked when I confronted her, her expression folding into confusion and disbelief as I laid out the truth in front of her. She sat there frozen, staring at the documents with my name on them, reading the transfer details, her mouth slightly open like she was trying to speak but couldn't find the right words. She swore she had no idea, that she thought the money was always meant for her, that our parents told her it was a special fund her grandparents had set aside just for her future. Her voice trembled a little when she said it, and for the first time I believed her. She had no reason to lie in that moment. The betrayal wasn't hers, it was theirs. But even that truth couldn't soften the weight sitting on my chest. It didn't matter that she didn't know. The damage was already done, and there was no version of this where things could ever go back to normal. I didn't want apologies anymore. I didn't want explanations. I just wanted distance. So I left. I walked out of that house with nothing but my keys and the folder pressed against my chest like it was the only thing keeping me upright, and I never answered their calls again. Not Lauren's quiet, guilt-filled messages. Not my mother's attempts to reason. Not my father's brief, angry voicemails. I was done. Because the truth was out, and even if they could live with it, I no longer had to. After walking away from my parents' house and cutting off contact, something inside me still needed answers. Real ones, not the kind twisted by guilt or deflection. So I reached out to my grandparents' lawyer, the one listed on some of the original paperwork I had found in that folder. He was retired but kind, and after verifying who I was, he agreed to meet with me. What I learned in that meeting added a whole new layer to the betrayal I thought I had already unraveled. My grandparents hadn't just left behind savings for me, they had created a formal trust fund specifically for my education. carefully structured and started with an initial deposit of $25,000. It was designed with love and intention, something they had done proudly, wanting to give me the kind of start in life they had never been able to afford for themselves. The fund was locked in with strict conditions, including one that gave my parents limited access to manage it only until I turned 18. After that, it was supposed to be mine. No loopholes, no confusion. It was written in black and white. But instead of honoring their wishes, my parents drained the account while I was still underage, disguising it as routine withdrawals for my benefit. They used every bit of authority they had, until the very last day it was legal, to quietly reroute the money to Lauren's account. No emergencies, no expenses for me, just a calculated transfer. They knew exactly what they were doing. And standing there in that quiet office, reading the original terms with my name so clearly spelled out, I felt something harden in me. It wasn't just neglect. It wasn't just favoritism. It was theft, pure and simple, and they had buried it under years of silence and manipulation, trusting I would never look deep enough to uncover what they had taken. But I had. And now I knew everything. The lawyer took his time reviewing everything, bank statements, trust documents, the notes I had found buried in that folder, and with each new detail, his face grew more serious. When I told him about the false disability claim, about how my parents had insisted for years that I wasn't college material, his expression shifted from concern to something closer to quiet outrage. Then he made the call to the bank to request archived files under the trust's history. And what came back confirmed what I already suspected but hadn't dared to say aloud until that moment. They had lied. My parents had deliberately submitted paperwork to the bank stating that I had a cognitive disability that rendered me legally unfit to manage my own finances. They included fabricated doctor's notes, completely false, signed off under the name of a physician I had never met in my life. That lie had been the cornerstone of their control. With it, they were able to extend their access to the fund well past the legal cutoff, all under the pretense of acting in my best interest. They built a wall of deception so thick that not only did the bank believe it, but I did too. For years, I accepted the version of myself they sold me, less capable, less deserving, a person who would never quite make it on their own. When I looked across the table, the lawyer didn't hesitate. He said I had a case. A strong one. Especially now, with the proof of falsified documentation and the clear violation of the trust's terms. There were consequences for what they had done, legal consequences. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't powerless in their story. I had the truth. And now I had a way to fight back. As the investigation deepened and more records surfaced, it became clear that not all of the stolen money had even gone toward Lauren's education like my parents had claimed. It turned out that around $30,000, money meant to fund my future, to open doors I had never been allowed to walk through, had been funneled into a major home renovation project. New floors, upgraded appliances, a bathroom remodel that they proudly showed off to guests, all paid for with money pulled from the trust under my name. And if that weren't enough, there was also a luxury family trip to Europe, one I hadn't even been invited to, let alone known the source of. Plane tickets, hotels, meals in cities I'd only dreamed of, each expense documented with receipts pulled directly from the account. When Lauren found out, her reaction was raw and immediate. She looked like someone who had just been punched in the gut. She told me she'd assumed all along that every dollar came from a separate college savings account, something their parents had created just for her. She had never once questioned it. But when I showed her the financial trail, the matching dates, the withdrawals, and the renovations that lined up perfectly with the missing funds, her face changed. She was horrified, genuinely shocked in a way that finally made it clear. This part of the betrayal hadn't touched just me. It had touched her too, just differently. Our parents had used her name to justify their theft, made her unknowingly complicit in their scheme, and then acted like none of it mattered. And in that moment, as she sat silently staring at the paperwork with her fingers trembling on the table, I saw the truth settle into her eyes. They had lied to both of us. But only one of us had lost everything because of it. With the evidence fully documented and the numbers calculated down to the last cent, my lawyer and I prepared an official letter of demand addressed to my parents. It wasn't just about the raw theft anymore. It was the sum total of what they had taken, not only financially but emotionally, piece by piece over the years, while they convinced me I was unworthy of anything more. The letter stated the full amount, $150,000. That figure included the money stolen directly from my trust, the additional funds spent on home renovations and luxury travel, accrued interest from the years I was denied access to my own future, and compensation for moral and emotional damage that ran deeper than any dollar sign could truly capture. The tone of the letter was formal, firm, and without room for misinterpretation. They were given two options: return the full amount within a set time frame, or we would proceed with a lawsuit. The evidence was overwhelming: bank records, forged medical documents, signed affidavits, even a statement from Lauren confirming their deception. It was no longer a family matter. It was a legal one. I signed the bottom of the letter with a steady hand, not because I wanted revenge, but because I finally understood that justice wasn't going to find me. I had to fight for it. If they chose silence, we would see them in court. And this time, I would no longer be the child waiting for scraps of truth from people who never saw me as worthy of the life they promised. Not long after receiving the demand letter, my parents responded by hiring a lawyer of their own, a man who reached out almost immediately in what I can only assume was an attempt to smooth things over before the situation escalated. But my lawyer, a calm, relentless professional who had seen far worse family betrayals than mine, handled the communication directly. He shut down any attempts at guilt-tripping or emotional manipulation before they even started. Their lawyer tried to play the sympathetic angle at first, talking about misunderstandings and complicated family dynamics, but my lawyer didn't entertain it. He laid out the facts, every number, every signature, every false statement, and made it clear this wasn't a negotiation out of emotion. It was a legal claim backed by documented fraud. After that first call, my parents changed their tone. They made an offer: $75,000, paid in installments over several years, as if they were doing me a favor by acknowledging just half of the damage they'd caused. It was insulting. This wasn't a car loan or a family disagreement over an inheritance. This was stolen opportunity, manipulated identity, years of forced struggle based on deliberate lies. My lawyer and I didn't even need to discuss it long. We refused the offer outright. It was too little, too late, and too convenient for them. If they wanted to avoid court, they'd have to acknowledge the full extent of what they'd done. Because this time, I wasn't going to be reasoned out of my own worth. Lauren made a decision I never expected from her. She packed up her things and moved out of our parents' house, not with drama or shouting, but with a quiet, determined kind of grief that told me she was finally seeing them clearly. After everything came to light, after she had read every document and seen the forged medical notes with my name attached, she sat me down and said she was sorry, not just in passing, but with the kind of sincerity that comes from someone whose world has been turned upside down. She told me she believed me fully, and that she was ashamed to have benefited from something so deeply unfair, even unknowingly. She stood by me, not as a sibling trying to fix what couldn't be undone, but as someone who genuinely wanted to do right by the truth. At one point, she even said she was thinking about dropping out of school, of giving back what she had received, and using whatever money she had left to help me rebuild. But I stopped her. I couldn't let her carry the weight of our parents' decisions. She hadn't lied, she hadn't stolen, and she certainly hadn't betrayed me. It wasn't her fault that they had twisted the system in her favor and hidden everything from both of us. I told her the best way to support me wasn't by sacrificing her own future, but by refusing to be part of their lie anymore. And she listened. She walked away from the comfort they had built around her and stood beside me instead. It was the first time in our lives that I didn't feel alone. When it became clear that we weren't going to settle quietly, my mother began crying in every message she sent, her voice cracking with guilt that only seemed to surface once she was caught. She begged me to think of family, to remember the good times, to believe that they meant well, as if good intentions could erase years of calculated deceit. My father, on the other hand, went in the opposite direction. He called me a traitor, shouted over the phone that I was trying to destroy them, that I had no gratitude, no respect, that I was nothing but an ungrateful child with a vendetta. He acted like I had shattered the family, as if I had burned down a house that had never even had a door open for me in the first place. But the truth stood firm. They were the ones who had betrayed me first. They were the ones who forged documents, who whispered lies to institutions, who let me believe I was incapable of more while they handed over my future to someone else and watched me struggle through poverty without once offering the truth. They made me work 12-hour shifts for minimum wage, let me miss out on the education I had earned, and gave me silence when I asked for help. They used my trust to fund someone else's dream and forced me to build a life from the scraps they left behind. So when they cried and shouted and begged, I didn't flinch. Because they were the ones who dragged me to court, not with lawyers and lawsuits, but with every decision they made to deny me the life I should have had. And now, finally, I was choosing to fight for it. I have not yet received a single cent of compensation, but what I have gained already feels more valuable than money. I have received the truth, and no one can take that away from me. The legal process ahead is long, filled with filings, hearings, and a courtroom that will reopen wounds I've worked hard to stitch closed. But despite all of that, There is one thing I know with absolute certainty. I will never again allow anyone to erase me, to rewrite my story, or to cross out my life under the comforting guise of the word family. That word, which once carried the weight of expectation and guilt, now means something entirely different. It is not loyalty without boundaries. It is not blind forgiveness in the face of betrayal. It is not silence in exchange for acceptance. From now on, family means honesty, respect, and people who see you, not as a tool for their convenience, but as a human being with your own dreams, your own worth, your own voice. And now that mine is finally being heard, I will never let it be silenced again.